Welcome to No Visible Bruises, the podcast that shares real-life survivor stories of narcissistic abuse, domestic abuse, and coercive control from a physiology-first and nervous system perspective, because you can't think your way out of this. You need to feel to heal. I'm Caroline Strawson, a survivor myself and now a trauma expert and educator. I am here to create change and understanding of the unseen abuse that we are not taught about in schools, and to heal from the inside out at a nervous system level. Let's break the silence and change the narrative, because we heal together. Massive welcome to No Visible Bruises, where I share survivor stories of narcissistic abuse, domestic abuse, and coercive control. Now, I've been absolutely thrilled with the response that we have had about all of our incredible interviews. But one of the key things some of you have mentioned is you're missing some of those kind of snapshot educational episodes that I always used to do. So I'm going to start to throw some more of those in. And ideally, what we'll have is 2 survivor stories a month and also 2 educational podcasts each month as well. And in today's episode, I want to talk to you a bit really about my own survivor story, because I think it's really, really important that so many people look at me now and think, Caroline, I can't imagine that you were ever in an abusive relationship, but you're only seeing me at this chapter. And I really want to share some of my highs and some of my very, very lows, so that you know, wherever you are right now on your journey in an abusive relationship, that there is light and hope at the end of the tunnel. One of the key things I think I've learned along the way is that there are certain types of people that end up in these abusive relationships. And that isn't about shaming people into, well, it's your fault why you end up in these types of relationships. Actually, it's the kindest, nicest, most empathetic people that end up in abusive relationships, because that is what abusers look for. Narcissists, domestic abusers, coercive controllers. I mean, let's be honest, it's all the same thing, especially when there's no visible bruises. You know, and one of the reasons I called the podcast No Visible Bruises is because I found it incredibly difficult when I came out of my relationship with my ex-husband, who was a covert narcissist, to really be believed, because to the outside world, we had a lovely house. We had 2 beautiful children, and it looked like the idyllic family, but it was very, very different behind closed doors, which made it really challenging when we went through our divorce and I started to share some of my experiences, because there was a level of judgment then of, well, why didn't you share that before? Why didn't you say that? And whilst I would say some things to say some of my friends or my family, and some of them knew what had happened around some of the affairs, but there was still an element of judgment of it still looked like a perfect family life. And I felt a bit of a fraud, and I felt failure, and I felt really, really stupid. But the reason why, when I look back, that I found myself in these types of not only toxic actual romantic relationships, but also friendships, I realized a lot of my friendships had been toxic, had been with narcissists too, was because I had a really deep lack of self-worth. And that had come from my childhood. You know, I had a mum who was just, when I think of her, sadly, she passed away in 2009, the most loving. I mean, you know, when you think of a mum, she's like the most maternal person ever. But really her only sense of worth came from being a mum, which for me, being the youngest of 3 girls, made it very, very challenging. I felt a real sense of responsibility for my mum's happiness. So on one side, to my mum, it was almost like I needed to remain still like a child, even though I was fiercely ambitious and wanting to be independent, but I still needed the love of my mum. And to get that, to give her a sense of worth, I kind of needed to act like a little bit of a child. And then on the flip side of that, with my father, he was really unemotional. So he would never praise me. And my interpretation of that as a child, if I was getting really good grades and I was really good at sport, there came a level of, well, there must be something wrong with me. You know, if my dad isn't praising me or saying that he loves me, then surely it's because of me then, because I'm the child and he's the adult. So my perception of that was, I'm not good enough. Now, of course, as an adult, I can look back and think, well, of course I was good enough. I was a kid. But you always have to think about, what would a child perceive in that moment if these events or behaviors were happening around them? And that's when these core wounds start to happen. So I was really carrying around a core wound of not feeling good enough. And as human beings, we're built for survival and to move away from pain, whether that be actual pain or emotional pain. So as a child not feeling good enough, that became my version of the biggest pain I could possibly feel, because it's not nice feeling like that as a child. So as a human being, everything for me and my inner system was about driving me away from feeling the emotional pain of not feeling good enough. So that meant I was pleasing everybody. I was this high achiever. I tried to be perfect all of the time, because ultimately I thought, surely if I showed up blended with all of those parts of me, then surely people would like me. People would show you my sense of worth, because I hadn't learned that simply for being me was good enough. What I'd learned was it needed to be something, how I looked, the sport I played, the grades that I got. And these became a version of love for me, that it wasn't based on simply for being me. It was based on something external. I needed others to give me my sense of worth. There lay the problem. That problem was then I needed other people to actually soothe the wound that I was carrying, which made me a magnet to these types of toxic relationships, because I would give, and please, please, please. And of course, toxic people want to take. But they will say all of the right things at the start of the relationships for you and make you feel so special, filling that hole in the soul, which is exactly what happened with my ex-husband. Because actually, initially when I met my ex-husband, he'd been married before, and that really put me off. You know, I was a young woman and I didn't want to be with someone who'd been married before. I wanted everything to be a first for us, but he was persistent. And ultimately then he was saying all these lovely and wonderful, nice things to me, which for someone who didn't feel worthy to the core, felt really, really good. There's the first hook. Then he started to do things like get my name on 3 months into our relationship as a tattoo on his arm. Now, we might all sit there and think, wow, that's a big red flag. And of course, I know that now if it was like 3 months into a relationship. But at the time, you have to imagine I was a woman who didn't feel worthy, who only felt worthy when other people showed me a sense of worth. And so if he was saying all and doing all of these lovely things, then it was really soothing that core wound that I was carrying of not feeling good enough. And that led me then to being really hooked into this relationship. But there were still red flags. When I came out of the relationship, I look back and I think there were still things that I look back and I think I just completely ignored. I had lots of people around me telling me what he was like. Everything about him being married, he was telling me one thing, that he was too young, but I was hearing other stories around all of that too. But of course, when he looked at me and was telling me, no, that's not true, this is what happened, this is what it is, who'd you believe? And of course, I ended up believing him, because ultimately, the secondary gain of being in a relationship with him was I was starting to feel some semblance of self-worth. I even remember on our wedding day, looking down, we got married in like an old manor house here in the UK. And I remember looking down at him. He was in the gardens and I was getting ready. And I looked down and I thought, what are you doing, Caroline? But we'd got everybody there. It had been paid for. And there was no way I could go out and say to everybody, actually, I'm not going to get married today to this person, because that would have felt like I was a failure, that there was something wrong with me, which would have triggered those core wounds of not feeling good enough. And I didn't want to let my parents down. So I went through with it. But I always felt like, looking back, there was something wasn't right. And one of the key things, and I don't know whether you can relate to this, is I always felt like he wasn't fully present in the relationship. And I used to say it was like he was off in this other land, like he was there, but he wasn't quite there. And from what I know about avoidant attachment styles now, with all the work that I do, there was a real sense of I had this anxious attachment that needed him to show me my sense of worth. And I wanted to be close to him so that I could feel worthy. The problem being is he had an avoidant attachment where it was, yes, you can get close, but not too close. So it always felt like I wasn't still quite good enough in the relationship with him. I ended up walking on eggshells. Now, he worked for an airline, so he was away a lot, didn't know really what he was up to. And actually, when I fell pregnant with our son, I gave up work completely. So became totally financially reliant upon him. Now, at the time, it looked like it was a joint decision. But remember, I was a fiercely ambitious woman as well, but I became totally reliant on him, which is a real element of financial abuse, of wanting to isolate you. So your world becomes them. You are there to serve, and you have no money of your own. You're reliant on them. And, I just got to the stage where I was probably turning into my mother a little bit, where my sense of worth was coming from being a mother as well. This is how our relationship carried on. And then I ended up having 4 miscarriages after our son. We were trying for another baby. And then I fell pregnant the 5th time. And we had my daughter. But 6 months into my pregnancy with my daughter, I found out he was having an affair. And the reason I found out was I was really poorly actually during my pregnancy. And my son and my ex-husband were sat at the table having dinner. I wasn't having it because I felt really ill. And his phone went off in his coat pocket in our downstairs cloakroom. So I was literally walking past, and I literally went to go and grab it in the pocket. And he shot up out of the table and grabbed it off me and kind of fiddled around with the buttons. And he said, "Oh, I've locked the phone." Now, inside I was thinking, that's a bit of an extreme reaction. But then there's another part of you, this is where the cognitive dissonance comes in, of, well, it can't be anything bad because we're married, I'm pregnant, we have a son. But there was still something not quite right. Now, bizarrely, the mobile phones were in both of my name because I had a phone before him. This was way, way back when mobile phones weren't really, really popular as such. So I'd got a mobile phone, and I just added another one to my account at the time, which was his. So I said to him, "Well, you go and finish your dinner, and I'll go and call EE." That was the company we used. I'll go and call them, and I'll get it unlocked. And you could see him shifting around. He was really, really uncomfortable with that. But what could he say? So I went off into the study with the door open, so he would have heard all of my conversation. And I unlocked the phone and I listened to the voicemail. And the voicemail was an American woman, and bear in mind we're English. So it was an American woman mentioning our son's name. Doesn't mention his name, which is really key here. Doesn't mention his name, but mentions our son's name. And clearly there was a relationship going on in that phone call. So I'm clinging to the phone, and I go out into our hallway downstairs, and I put it to his ear. And I actually said, "Get out." And of course he was like, what? And he listened to it, and he said, "Well, I don't know who that is." And I said, "How can you say that? It mentions our son." And he said, "Well, it's a coincidence. I don't know who it is." So of course I'm thinking, don't be ridiculous. Of course it's about you. Of course that isn't a coincidence. But he's looking me dead in the eye as my husband, saying it's a coincidence. So I start doubting myself at this point. Could it be a coincidence? I even called the number, and the person who answered wasn't the person who left a message, but they did say to me, "I'm really sorry, it was a wrong number." So now I'd got the person on the other end of that voicemail basically saying it's a wrong number. It was a mistake, even though they mentioned our son's name. I'd got my husband looking at me in the eye saying to me, "I don't know who they are, but there's something off." And of course, there I was 6 months pregnant. So I call my parents, and my parents come over, and I let them listen to it. And I'm clinging to this phone. I'm thinking, you are not having this back because this is my evidence. And I'm looking, and it was from a place in Chicago too. So my parents came over. They listened to it, and they looked at my husband at the time and said, "Doesn't look good, does it?" He looks them in the eye. "I don't know who it is. Caroline's called them. It was a wrong number. They said it was a wrong number. This is a pure coincidence." So me and my parents are sat there thinking, doesn't feel like it's a coincidence. But now the evidence, we've got my husband saying it's a coincidence, the person on the end of the phone. But really, that coincidental of talking about our son's name and really some of the things that we were doing, things weren't right, but he's still denying it. So my parents went home, and my husband went to sleep in another room that night because I thought, no, I just don't want to. And actually been sleeping in another room for a while because things, again, my son was still co-sleeping with us, and I was poorly. So it just kind of made sense. Actually, when I look back, I think it's because I felt like things weren't right in my relationship, and keeping my son in the bed was also a way of keeping me safe physically too. So he went off to bed. Our son was in bed, and I started doing some digging. I was looking at his roster, his cabin crew for an airline, and I started to look at patterns of where he'd been. And he'd been to Chicago a lot. flights had been changed to go to Chicago a lot. So my gut was just saying, this is not right. But the gaslighting that was happening, trying to tell me that, no, it's fake, it's a coincidence. So I was kind of in this state of, is it me? Am I the crazy one here? Am I overreacting? Am I oversensitive here? Am I over dramatizing all of this? Of course, key things that happen when we're being gaslit, we put the doubt in our minds. So when we woke up in the morning, cabin crew with this airline, they have like a crew card where they can spend money on it when they're away. So I asked him and I said, can I see what you've been spending on your crew card? Because I thought maybe that would be something when he was in Chicago, if they'd been out for dinner loads or things like this. And he gave me his wallet and he gave me it very, very freely. So again, I'm thinking, that's not a guilty person to give me that. So it was kind of stacking for him at this particular point. So again, he's sat in the lounge. I go in the study. The door is open. So he's hearing me with all of this. So I'm on our computer. I'm trying to log in to see, but I couldn't log in. It was locked. But as I had his wallet, I also found a business card in there for a motel in Chicago. Now, bear in mind, when you're cabin crew, you get your hotel already. So it was a bit like, why is there a motel card in here for Chicago? There's a reservation number on the back. So I called the motel and I quoted the reservation number and they said, oh, yes, Mr. Strawson had booked it, but it's now been cancelled. So I said, okay, thank you very much. And I sat there for a moment and I thought, this isn't a coincidence. And I remember going and standing in the door frame of our lounge, and I can picture it now. He sat on the settee and I literally said, are you still going to deny this? And I could see literally the cogs going in his brain thinking, can I get away with this anymore? Or have I got to admit to it now? So what did he do? He started crying. Of course he did. He started crying. I am so sorry. I felt so bad that you'd had the miscarriages, and this particular woman, she was comforting me. She was working away from home because she'd got a young baby, and we kind of found solace in each other's arms. And I just felt so useless when you've been so poorly. You went through all of those miscarriages. So what did I do? I apologized. I said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that you have felt like this. So there I am, 6 months pregnant, apologizing to him for him having an affair. Figure that one. But that's what gaslighting and abuse does to you. You're so fearful of things, about being left or being abandoned, and you've lost so much of who you are in these situations. My initial go-to was to apologize to him for the affair he had and comfort him. And then I asked to call the woman that he had an affair with. So I called her and she started crying because actually they'd been found out previously by her husband. And she'd said then they'd ended it, but they got back together again and her husband didn't know about this. So she started crying that she'd got a young baby and she had to go out to work because they needed the money. So what did I do? I comforted her. So there I was, 6 months pregnant. I'd been cheated on by both of them. And I was comforting my husband and apologizing to him for having miscarriages and being poorly and not giving him attention. And he needed to seek that somewhere else. And then I ended up comforting the person he'd had an affair with because she'd also was upset. That was a really strong people-pleasing part of me. Forgetting about who I was because I still saw my sense of worth in how other people were around me. So I needed to make them feel okay so I could go back to feeling okay. I couldn't even go out and get drunk because I was 6 months pregnant. But really from that moment, I would say it was a real pivotal point in my marriage, I would say, where I think from that moment, I completely dissociated in my body, completely disconnected from any sense of emotion, any sense of feeling. I really literally felt my sense of worth was being a mum. That was it. I felt fat. I felt ugly. I felt like if my husband was going to have an affair, what does that say about me? Not putting it on him. It was all about, it's my fault. But that's what abuse does to you. You start to feel like everything is your fault. And we kind of carried on like that. We had my daughter. I was suffering with postnatal depression. And then a year after our daughter was born, my mum passed away very, very suddenly. And she was my rock. And there I was then in this, what I felt was a loveless marriage. He was away a lot anyway because of flying. I didn't know what he was up to. And I kind of didn't care really at that particular point. I was numb. I was just being a mum and grieving and just existing. I wasn't living. And about a year and a bit after my mum had passed away, my husband walked out on us. He took 10 minutes to tell me and our son, because our daughter was having a nap at the time. And I remember my son falling to the floor, shouting like, no, like this. And then he left and just literally up and left. And at this particular point, the altruism of a narcissist, he left because he said he couldn't stand seeing me so unhappy. He knew I was unhappy in our marriage and he couldn't stand watching me be so unhappy anymore. So it was like he was doing me a favor by leaving. Again, something inside of me felt like, I'm sure there's somebody else, but he was adamant that there was nobody else. He just couldn't stand seeing me this unhappy. It was like he was a hero in setting me free of the unhappiness of our marriage. And it was only 6 weeks later when I received a text that clearly wasn't meant for me. A very sexual text. And in that moment, there was a real sense of validation of, I knew it. But then he knew I knew. And he'd been fairly amicable up until that point. He'd moved quite a long way away and he wasn't seeing the kids that much. And actually, when he came to see the kids, I'd leave the marital home and he'd even go in. But at that particular moment, I knew then what he was like. And I remember he was meant to be seeing the children that day. And when he sent me the text, I didn't actually reply to start off with. And a couple of hours later, I still hadn't replied. And he sent me a message that said, I know you know. Take the kids to one of our friends and I'll meet you at the house. So I said, okay. And when I went home to our marital home and I packed up some more of his stuff in bin bags and put it in the hallway. And when he arrived, I said, can I have the key to the house and can I have the phone back? Because obviously that was in my name. And interestingly, he must have known I was going to ask for his phone because he'd wiped it. He knew. So, and I remember he'd been reasonably friendly and amicable till that point. I remember we were both stood in kind of door frames in our hallway, leaning up against the door frames. And I remember saying to him, I have no idea how many affairs you have had. And I remember him looking at me, cold as ice. Bear in mind, I'm the mother of his children, cold as ice, looking at me in the eyes saying, it's none of your business, is it? And it gives me goosebumps now to think that somebody that you got married to, that you loved, that you were together, that all of a sudden was treating you like this. And in that moment, everything changed. And this is what we call post-separation abuse as well. You kind of think if you're going through a divorce from somebody, anybody in some respects, that, the divorce is the kind of a final point and then you move on. Not with abusers, not with narcissists. No, it escalates because they've lost that level of control over you then. You know what they're like and they need to smear your reputation. They need to collate what we call flying monkeys to kind of tell them their version of events, leaving maybe them doubting your sense of reality and what you are then disclosing because there's no visible bruises. And I didn't realize we were in so much debt. We were in over £70,000 worth of debt. And actually in April 2013, me and my two children were also made homeless. I hit 40 in the June of 2013. And I thought, what is my life? Is this my life? I'd suffered with PTSD or complex PTSD, as I now know, depression, anxiety, self-harm, panic attacks. I was at a really, really low ebb. And I've always said this, if it wasn't for my two children, I would not be sat here recording this podcast right now. I just wouldn't have been there at all. I'd lost my mom, I'd lost my marriage, I'd lost my home, I'd lost the hope of what my life would have been. I was 40 with nothing, less than nothing. Because remember, I'd given up work. I'd given up work. And I felt so much shame. I didn't even realize. I thought I was an intelligent woman. How did I not know I'd been in an abusive relationship? How did I not know that? How did I not know the signs of coercive control, domestic abuse, narcissistic abuse? Why had nobody taught me this stuff in school? Why didn't I recognize what gaslighting was, what manipulation was, what control was? Why did I not know that? But nobody had taught me. I didn't recognize that. And actually, when I look back, I look at my parents' relationship and my parents' parents' relationship. There were patterns all the way through, literally, but no visible bruises in those relationships. And this is what made me really passionate, because then I was trying all the traditional things, counseling, psychotherapy. I felt good in the moment because someone was validating and listening to me. But the moment I came out of that and walked out of that treatment room and something triggered me, I spiraled again. There was something missing. What was wrong with me? Why were these traditional methods not working for me? And it was then when I started to find a really missing piece in trauma healing, in healing from these experiences. And that was about the nervous system, the somatic side, the embodiment piece. You know, so many of these therapies that we get taught to do are what we call top down, talking. But you don't think anxiety, you don't think depression, you don't think a panic attack, you feel it. So we have to work at the body level. We have to work at that nervous system level. So what did I do? I was a podiatrist at the time. I completely retrained. I retrained in and learned all about, I've got a postgrad in positive psychology. I retrained in things like somatic experiencing, internal family systems, which is a parts therapy, breath work, EMDR, brain spotting, hypnotherapy, all of these body-based modalities, because I realized that if I really wanted to heal, I had to really work at a nervous system level. I couldn't think my way out of it, and time wasn't healing me because time was ticking on. So I completely retrained, which is now what led me to do what I now do, because I teach people about the physiology of abuse, the physiology of trauma. You know, it's all very well known the psychology of all of these things. But you know what? Physiology will override psychology every single time. You know, you might think, I'm not going to contact my ex. I'm not going to respond to them. I'm not going to eat that piece of cake. So cognitively, the psychology of that, we say. But the moment you get a trigger and it rips the scab off those core wounds that we might have, physiology overrides that. Emotions override logic every single time. Our nervous system will go into a survival response. We'll have a ton of protector parts coming up, trying to move you away from feeling what maybe your core wound is. And for me, that was, I'm not good enough. So I went on this whole journey, and I wanted to really share just a snippet really of my own survivor story. And you can read more about it in my How to Heal After Narcissistic Abuse book, where it's sharing my story, and there's loads of tools and tips as well of how you can really start to heal after abuse at a physiological level, because I didn't want to just help people stay stuck in the present. We need to heal the past, understand how our past experiences shape our somatic memory in our body and drive our behaviors in the present moment and moving into these survival responses. But I also wanted to help people thrive and flourish. That's where the positive psychology comes in. And there's a great term in positive psychology called post-traumatic growth, which is actually growth because of the trauma you've experienced, because trauma is domestic abuse, narcissistic abuse, coercive control. And I genuinely believe that I'm sat here now doing these podcasts, sharing all of this with you for a reason. I genuinely believe my mum passed away before I went through my divorce, because had it been the other way around, I'd have acted like that child again, and my mum would have had a great sense of worth looking after me then. So my mum passing away, and I genuinely feel like this, I know this sounds a little bit woo-woo as such, but I genuinely feel my mum passed away so that then when I went through my divorce, I had to pick myself up. Rock bottom really did become that solid foundation for me to build my life, because my dad wasn't there for me. My sisters did as much as they possibly could for me, but I had to heal myself. I waited for someone to rescue me, and maybe you are waiting for someone to rescue you. Yeah, no one's coming to rescue you. You've got to rescue yourself. And it's the biggest gift you can give yourself, and of course your children too. So you need to rescue yourself in all of this. But ultimately, if you do that, you can go on and thrive and flourish. Trauma does not have to be a life sentence. Trauma isn't a narcissist, a coercive controller, a domestic abuser. That isn't the trauma. The trauma is what you say to yourself, the beliefs you hold inside your body about the abuser, that I'm not good enough, I don't matter, I'm not important, I'm unlovable, I'm worthless. The power to heal is in you changing your somatic memory, changing your interpretation of your past experiences from one of this is happening to me because I'm not good enough to this is happening to me, but I'm still good enough. And it's about them and their reasons for doing that, their lack of capabilities. My father didn't praise me not because he was choosing not to, because he wasn't capable of. He'd never been taught any of that. So we've got this missing somatic piece in healing. And this is what drives me to do the work that I do. This is why I believe my mum passed away first, so that I could go on and be a voice for many of you where there are no visible bruises, to help you understand the vocabulary that surrounds all of this, things like gaslighting, coercive control, narcissism, because I'll keep talking about narcissistic abuse because we should do. It's a word that's really important for survivors of abuse. And it doesn't mean it's a diagnosis. I don't believe in diagnosis. I don't believe in any of those things, because if we pathologize things like that, we're giving people excuses. And that's not the case. So I hope this has been really helpful, maybe getting to know me, maybe you're new to me, get to know a little bit about it. And it's just a snippet of my story, really. But I want you to know, wherever you are right now, I have been there. I know what it's like. And my life is very, very different now. But some of the key pointers from that is I had to take responsibility for my own healing. Nobody was coming to rescue me. So you have to take responsibility. You have to surround yourself with the right people. And I'll pop one of my Facebook community groups in the show notes. Don't be on your own in any of this. You may not even know where to start. Maybe you're still in the relationship. Maybe you've just come out. Maybe you're long out of it, but you're still really, really stuck. This is because of our nervous system, and this is a missing piece in the healing side of trauma, domestic abuse, narcissistic abuse, and coercive control. So I hope you enjoy this episode, getting to know me a little bit more, and you're enjoying all of our wonderful, wonderful survivor stories. And if you ever want to be a guest as well, I'll put a link in the show notes if you'd like to be a guest, whether that be in person here at the studios here in Milton Keynes in Buckinghamshire in the UK, or even online. Fill that in, because we're always looking for amazing other survivor stories, as long as you're legally able to share your experience as well. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of No Visible Bruises.